You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and now it's time for the Paranormal Peep Show.
Hi, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Ward. But where's Andy tonight? Well, Andy is out busy because it's the month of Halloween. That's October season where he's out chasing ghosties and ghoulies because he's got his tuned-in events, which he hosts around the Hertfordshire area. So he's very, very busy doing those psychic nights and catching lots of ghosties and ghoulies and probably doing too much on the pumpkin soup. So standing in for him this evening is our good friend Ben Emlyn-Jones. How are you, Ben?
Hey, Neil, I'm very well, thanks. It's great to be on the show as a co-host. I've been a guest so many times. It makes a nice change. I'm glad that I can step in and into Andy's shoes and help you out here. It's really great.
Thank you. Very cool of you. So the last time I saw you, Ben, was back in July in Portland, here in Dorset.
That's right. Yes, we had a really, really good time, didn't we? I did a talk for the Dorset Earth Mysteries group, and we did a little tour of the area, and we really saw some amazing things, didn't we? And did our little experiment on the flag. That was quite something.
We did, yeah. The Apollo wet flag experiment, which will probably be known to viewers of the Apollo detectives, but we haven't actually put that out there yet. But I'm sure it will be soon. But we also saw Portland Castle, which was of interest, built by Henry VIII. So yeah, you had a great time. I understand that you possibly might be coming back to Dorset next year.
It's not confirmed yet, but I am, thanks to you who've helped me out with this. I'm now in touch with the group again, and I'd like to arrange a meeting probably in a few months' time. I'll sort of sort it out about when's a good time to slip me into the schedule. And so they're such a nice group, and the area is such a beautiful place. And if the weather's anything like it was when I was there last, I can't wait.
Good. Well, we're looking forward to it. Well, I'm going to be doing a talk on probably Sasquatch encounters and things like that. Now, there's one man that does know a lot about Sasquatch, but all sorts of other things as well in that line of strange and bizarre. And that's our guest for this evening. So I'd like to welcome aboard the Paranormal Peep Show, Preston Dennett once more. Hello, Preston. Are you there?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, Preston.
Thank you for joining us. So, Preston, how are you, first of all?
Oh, I'm doing well, keeping busy, so always having fun.
That's your kind of your sign that when you end your videos, keep having fun. So it's good to see that you're living by that. So you just brought out a new book, Humanoids and High Strangeness. Is that correct?
I sure did. Yeah, book number 31. You believe it?
Wow. How long does it take you to write one of your books?
Well, I'm getting better at it. The research is what really takes a long time. So that would take a couple of years, easy. But once I've got all the information lined up, it takes, I would say, 4, 5 months, 6. It depends. This one, I did put it up pretty quick, but then you have to send each chapter back to the witness so they can verify it for accuracy. And these sort of things take a little bit of time.
Wow. So in the case of your latest book, you contact each witness individually, or you don't just sort of see something in a MUFON entry and think, oh, I'll just write that down. You actually go ahead and interview them over the phone or over the internet or something?
Basically, most of them reach out to me, I will say, whether it's from a referral from family or friends or something like that, or they see me on your podcast and call me. Or on TV or my website, read one of my books. There's a number of different ways people contact me.
And when you get contacted by people, and do you have like like a, I don't know, an inner knowing that what they're telling you is true, or do you kind of get hunches that something doesn't feel right and this person's making it up, or do you have a kind of like a way of working it out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a whole process I go through. The vast majority of people I contact, I don't interview. They're just looking for information, or people who contact me, rather, are looking for information or corroboration, or just have a question, perhaps. But if a person has a really interesting story, I will ask them if I can interview them. Having already had a conversation with them, then I record it so I can sort of go through, make sure there's not any changes. And yeah, some people come off as being a little bit shady or sketchy or dodgy, as you might say in England. Yeah, most people, I think, are really reluctant to speak about this, and they can be very emotional. We'll often say things like, I don't do drugs. I've got a good education. I have a good job. There's no history of mental illness in my family. And when they say these sort of things, you start to realize, okay, they've probably had a genuine experience. But one more thing, as they describe it, there are little details that are perhaps best known only by UFO researchers, people who are really into this subject. And when they start saying these little tiny details, which can be anything from how the ETs are dressed, or what they say, or what the interior of a UFO looks like, a craft, or the tools they use, or the events that take place. These are little details that I think lend credibility to a person's account, because I've heard them before. Most of what people tell me, I've heard before. And certainly back years ago, that was a lot easier to do because this wasn't as popular a subject as it is now. But yeah, I get witness referrals, or what would you call it when someone vouches for your character. And I love when I get a multiple witness case, or if they have evidence of any kind, photographs, landing traces, implants. So there's all kinds of things you can do to verify a person met their account.
Do you find that when you're interviewing these people, they possibly are being investigated simultaneously, or they may have been investigated by other MUFON, Mutual UFO Network researchers around the same time as yourself? Or are you like the first person to really get hold of them?
That varies. I would say in most cases, I'm really the only person they've talked to about this, but certainly that's not always true. Some people I've talked to worked with other investigators and were not happy with them. And, we're looking for someone who was more suitable, I guess. And yeah, I mean, there's one case in the book where a lady did report her case to MUFON, and it was investigated by the field researcher as well as myself. Her case is getting actually a lot of attention and might actually be featured on a future television program. So that's still in the works, and I'm not verified. Yeah, Susan Ware is her name. Her case is getting a lot of attention. She wanted her case told to the public and chose me.
Right. And what's kind of interesting about her particular case?
Oh, it's an extraordinary case, actually, because it's a multiple witness case, for one. And while it did occur some years ago, she is a lifelong contactee, which is usually the case. Not always, but this is something that is rarely a one-off. But she had a very intense missing time encounter in 1978 while driving through the deserts in Utah late at night, and ended up having missing time of about, well, let's see, say it's 8 or 9 hours, which is pretty unusual. Normally it would be 1 or 2, perhaps. But yeah, very intense case. She just recently started really looking into. But
right,
there's a lot of features to it.
Did she have a regression to try and access the memories of that time?
She did, yeah. And I will say that most of the people who are in my books don't use hypnosis. I think it works as long as it's in the right hands, because there is a lot of evidence showing that this can produce not completely accurate recall. But there's evidence that shows it can be absolutely accurate and a very valid tool. I kind of shied away from it because of that. So I can definitely tell anyone who says, no, you can explain all these cases by hypnosis. I'm like, well, hold on a second. No, you can't. 80% of the people I've talked to have never touched it. But she did, because she really, really wanted to know. And that's what I think, if you have a clear-cut case of missing time, if it's causing you some issues in terms of dealing with this, I think it's an excellent tool. And she ended up going on regressive hypnosis with someone who's quite experienced at it. Deb Shakti is their name. She worked with John Yost in his book, or in his award-winning documentary, Alien Abduction Answers. So yeah, she went under hypnosis. Well, she did recall some of it consciously, which is almost always the case. She did use hypnosis, yes.
And what was her experience of once she started to recall it?
Well, what she does remember, her and her friend Karen were driving along this highway outside of Enoch, Utah, and they were heading for Pagosa Springs. They were going to do an all-night drive. And at some point, they realized, there was a beautiful, clear night with the stars and the moon. They realized that they could not see the moon. That really puzzled them, really started to concern them, because they couldn't see the stars either. The sky was just pitch blackness. It made zero sense. At this point, they're not really feeling fear, but they're really wondering, how could this possibly be true? So they're hanging their heads out the window, looking all around them, and no stars, no moon, nothing. And then Karen, who was driving, slams on the brakes, and standing in front of them is something they can hardly believe. It's a group of about 20, maybe 30 rabbits. They're not normal. For one thing, they're all situated along the highway for about 100 yards, spaced out kind of like sentries, each, 10 feet between each one. This weirdly random but uniform sort of pattern. And every single one of them was about 4 feet tall, kind of muscular looking, and had their backs to them. So this could not be normal. I mean, this was just outrageous. They had been talking about that earlier, but perhaps that is significant. I don't know. But they got out of the car. The radio's playing, the lights are on, the engine's running. But the two of them get out of the car, walk to the front, and are looking at them, trying to figure out what is going on. The closest one was, maybe 10 feet, 20 feet away from them, at which point they turned around in unison. And of course, they weren't rabbits. They were grays. And ears disappeared, and all of that. That was what we would call a screen memory. At that point, several things happened at once. The car lights went out, the radio went off, the engine died, a giant bright light shone down on them from above. Looking up, they could see something very large. And Susan started screaming, and at that point, the next thing they know, they're waking up in a rundown diner in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, which is 300, 400 miles away. It did not show on their speedometer, or their gas tank was still where it had been in the odometer. Didn't show that these miles had been driven. That was something they noticed a little bit later. They were pretty much dazed. And she had a very severe sunburn over most of her body, both of them did, to the point where it blistered. So there was medical evidence that something happened, physiological evidence. That was the missing time.
Right. And did it then follow a typical grey abduction scenario where they're medically looked at, like Betty and Barney Hill, or was there something else happening as well?
Yeah, it was fairly typical, and there's always little bits of new elements. Because what she did have some memory of flying down to the car consciously, and she kept wondering about that. Back then, there wasn't a whole lot of information on this subject. But years later, which is fairly recently actually, she went under hypnosis and recalled that she and her friend Karen were taken up into this craft with the car, apparently. And she didn't see what happened to her friend, but she was taken into a room where there was a gray being, little gray, and she had no fear at this point. He seemed very friendly, and she actually asked him, "Can I touch you? Can I reach out and touch you?" And he said, yes. And she ran her fingers down its arm. So it felt very much like dolphin skin, which I thought was interesting because I've heard that before. So it had a slightly different texture, kind of like almost styrofoam-like. She was trying to find words to describe it, which is always funny to me because that is another thing I look for. People are trying really hard to find the words to describe something that's absolutely out of their realm of experience. But she touches this gray and says, "Ew." And the gray said, "No, not you. I am you, and you are me."
Mm.
That's another thing that I thought was significant, because that is a very common message contactees get. They're told we all share a common heritage. At that point, she was physically examined, which wasn't painful or scary to her. And then she does remember being shown images. And this, to me, is the most important takeaway from her experience. She saw images of war, tanks and bombs exploding and soldiers shooting each other and all this sort of thing, smoke. And they told her that humanity is on the wrong path, that you need to tell people to love each other, that love is the answer, and that violence will lead to the extinction of the human race. It's basically what they told her, not in so many words, but in a telepathic. That's her experience in a nutshell, which totally made sense to her because as a little child, she does remember seeing these grays looking in her window. She would find herself outside at night, without realizing how she got there, locked out of the house. And that was all at age 5. And that was when she started having these dreams about wars and tanks in her street. She lived in a tiny little rural town in North Carolina. So for her to be, having these dreams was absolutely out of character, coming out of nowhere. She hadn't been exposed to anything like that. But it absolutely echoed what she'd been told much later in this onboard experience, missing time. So that is a message that they often give contactees. So I think that is probably why she was taken on board, because they're trying real hard to wake us up to the fact that we are on the wrong path.
Now, Ben, that message of battles, war, and things like that being implanted into abductees' minds, we've seen that before, haven't we? With the South African case of the ship landing with the school children.
Ruler, yes.
That encounters documentary.
Zimbabwe. Yeah, it's actually quite what Preston's described with this particular case is actually, it contains a lot of the tropes you see in many, many abductions. It almost has a lot of typical qualities. And the communication between the ETs and the humans via telepathy, they don't often speak. Some species do, but generally the more humanoid ones are more likely to speak. However, very often, even with the very humanoid ones, there is a kind of telepathic communication. The mouth doesn't move, the vocal tract doesn't actually move, and all you get is like voices in your head. That's how people describe it. That's very common. The screen memory as well. There's actually a guy who's a researcher and experiencer called Paul Sinclair. He also saw some rabbits, which they behave very oddly because he was just walking along a little pathway and he saw some rabbits, but they weren't behaving like normal rabbits. They were just standing there looking at him. They're also a lot bigger than most rabbits. He thought they might be hares at first, but it turns out they were rabbits. But then later on in that same day, he had an experience. He believes it was screen memory. And the common heritage thing. I mean, there's many ideas that we may in some way be connected to them genetically, spiritually, mentally, in some way or another. I mean, this is very often they don't go into great detail, these beings, and they're not always honest either. They can deceive and they can play tricks, and people report many different kinds of experiences with these beings, and it's extraordinary. However, there's no doubt it's real. I mean, it's the idea this is some kind of sleep paralysis or illusion is nonsense. I mean, Andrew Hodrian's study on that is absolutely definitive. I think that it decounts the dream sleep paralysis thing. I mean, I suffer from sleep paralysis. I get it about once a month. It doesn't bother me much. Dreams. I mean, everyone has dreams. You couldn't sleep properly unless you have them. But there is a distinct difference. Firstly, in the quality of the experience. Secondly, evidence in terms of like the marks on the body. There's that whole abduction syndrome that comes with it. Yeah. So, and it's so really this is an extraordinary situation we humans are dealing with, and it seems we've always had these kinds of experiences. That no one can find a beginning to it really when it first started, but it's a shame that what you said at the beginning, Preston, that the people you talk to, one of the first things they say to you is things like, "I'm not crazy, I don't take drugs," and things like that. I'm not into drugs. I'm not mentally ill. So why is it necessary to persuade you so hard of that? Why is they so urgently want to persuade you of that? And it's because it's a rhetorical question. We have a society where such experiences are denied. They're on the periphery. They're outside the Overton window of what we accept within normal society, which is a shame because they are very real. They're as real as any other experience we have, and not everyone has them, obviously, but those who do have them. And it seems that then our culture, it probably goes back many generations actually before the modern UFO phenomenon, that having these experiences, maybe to the times of the early churches when people had witch burnings and things. But there's definitely been a change in society where these kinds of experiences were denied. Whereas, there are some cultures where in places like South America, for example, where people are a lot more open to these ideas. I know that this is why possibly in South America, we're going to talk about, well, he's Mexican, that's North America, but he does a lot of work with South America, Jaime Maussan. You don't have this stigma in that continent like you do elsewhere. And
a lot of indigenous cultures throughout the world accepted this. And frankly, I blame our governments for doing a very concerted campaign, very well funded, spending an enormous amount of time, money, and energy to make this subject now credible, to ridicule witnesses, to define every UFO experience as either a hoax, a hallucination, or a misperception. Using our tax dollars. I blame them. This should be accepted because it's widespread. A lot of people are having these experiences.
And they have done it deliberately, I think, Preston. I mean, I've been into this a lot myself. I think the suppression and the marginalization within culture is deliberate. It has a purpose.
100%, yeah.
What is the purpose to hide the presence of aliens, ETs, from us as Westerners? Is it because the governments fear they haven't got a control on the situation and they want to be the top dog type of thing?
To an extent, I think that's exactly it. Honestly, I think it's a threat to their power, their control over society. The bottom line is greed, power, and money. I really think that's the driving force behind the UFO cover-up. Because we do have these craft. I'm sure you've heard of Roswell, the crash in 1947 in New Mexico. It's not unique. There are many other cases of this. It's pretty clear, judging from the many whistleblower accounts, and more coming out daily, that we do have these craft, this technology, the bodies, and that would be a game changer for sure. I mean, there's absolute conclusive evidence, and if there's technology that would basically make fossil fuels redundant or useless, well, we've got basically an oil-based economy. The oil industry is making billions of dollars in profits. We're not going to let that go easily. The energy, industry in general. So I think there's a lot of reasons behind the cover-up, but ultimately I think it's power.
So if it has been covered up, now obviously in more recent years, we've had this kind of drip effect of things coming to light through official channels. I mean, earlier this year in February, I think, Ben, you covered it with the balloons going across Alaska and other unidentified objects allegedly being shot down. And then literally, was it July or August, we had David Grush coming forward?
June, yeah. It started in June.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a strange year. It's been a very odd year. And I do think that there are now people who seem to be in positions of authority, or at least there's a faction of people in positions of authority who do want to end this truth embargo. And they're trying to find a way of doing it, but at the same time, they believe, for whatever reason, that they have, in a sense, in order to undo the cultural tidal set that we've been talking about here, you have to do it slowly and carefully and in stages. So there's something theatrical going on, I believe. This is why we seem to have like a parade of different events happening, and when they happen, it seems they go away, then something else comes along, things like that. The so-called balloon thing in February was remarkable because there's with one exception, that is the large Chinese balloon that actually flew right over continental North America and was shot down over the sea. That was the first one, but then there were 3 others that followed, and there's absolutely no evidence to suggest those things were balloons. They were never described as, but only one was actually described as a balloon by one person. That was the Canadian general. Apart from that, the word balloon was never used. They were called objects, which is extremely unusual. I kind of wonder if it's some kind of psychological test to see how people would react.
Yeah. What did you make of that, Preston, when you was getting reports coming through of these strange objects, often referred to as balloons, as like the operative word to use at the time? But I mean, what was your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I honestly don't think they're genuine UFOs because we've not been able to shoot down any UFOs as far as I can tell. They basically outdistanced our fastest missiles. They know when we're out there, can fly circles around anything we've got. Their technology is that advanced. And it stunk of propaganda. I mean, it really did. I thought it was very interesting that they were calling them UFOs and not UAPs, which they've been trying to push that term for a while.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was all just, like you said, Ben, almost a parade. You said it was odd, for sure, and really felt like it was more of a propaganda than the actual series of events. I suspect that they were drones from other countries. I don't know. I haven't really dug deep into that, but it came into the media, was headlines, then disappeared. That always makes me suspicious. It was very unusual.
They would have flight logs, presumably, the aircraft that went to intercept them. And I suppose you could do a freedom of information request to try and find out further information if any researchers have done that, which is what they did. Yeah, what did he come up with? Did he find anything substantial?
Do you know what? I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't checked. He produces so much material, I haven't checked yet.
Hard to keep up with him. Yeah,
the truth from our governments, honestly. They've been lying from the beginning. They're still lying. I don't trust them. I think if we want to get the truth about this phenomenon, we got to go to the people who are having experiences, which is where I've concentrated my research.
This is a point I mentioned, I think, in one of the comments to one of your videos, actually, because like NASA have announced they've now been pulled in to give their take on the whole UAP/UFO phenomena. And NASA suddenly, after like 60 plus years of being around, is now going to do a bit of investigation. I mean, the fact that they've been sending, flights to Mars of robot craft and things landing on Mars, saying we're going to look for signs of life, and we've got these little test kits on there, and they're going to probe the soil. They're suddenly now going to, we better look into this UFO stuff. The fact it's been, we've been buzzed by these UFOs for the past 75 years and beyond, presumably. And that's to suddenly think, maybe we should actually look with our telescopes and see what's out there. And really, like I think I mentioned on one of Preston's videos, it's incredible. They're spending millions of dollars doing this kind of thing, but they're not actually interviewing witnesses on the ground, which is Joe Soap, isn't it? The actual public that are having these experiences. And it's interesting to note that during those Senate hearings, they had 3 people that were interviewed as witnesses, and they were military whistleblowers, if you like. They haven't got to the stage where they're going to put Joe Soap out in public to give their testimony, because I think really their testimony would be the most telling. Seeing craft through a gun scope, going at speed is one thing, but when you've got a witness that says, well, actually I was taken aboard and they did this to me and they did this and they also showed me scenes of war and things like that, in an official capacity, would be quite a serious concern for the public, I think, if it's suddenly acknowledged in a public hearing. Wouldn't you say, Preston?
Yeah, I think NASA is being entirely disingenuous when they say we don't know what this is. I think they know. And yeah, I absolutely agree. It's a glaring I don't know what the word would be, hole in their story, in the fact that they're not even looking at anyone who claims contact. And there's a lot of people. I mean, if they could have interviewed Charlie Hickson and Kelvin Parker or Travis Walton or Whitley Strieber, the long list of people claiming direct contact. And if you don't want to go there, how about taking a look at the landing trace cases? Because boy, do we have a lot of those. Thousands. The Lani Zamora case in New Mexico, Socorro, or the Trans-en-Provence case in France, or the Delphos, Kansas landing trace case. Those are just 3 good ones, but there's a lot of them. This is hard evidence. I mean, let's take a look at the implant cases where people claim to have objects in their bodies, and some have been removed. Dr. Roger Lear really spearheaded that research. He's now, of course, passed away, but that is some absolutely undeniable evidence. I have cases myself. I think most researchers do. So why not look at that? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that they're talking about sightings and saying we don't know what they are.
Yeah, that's a crazy notion. What I find interesting is that these researchers, well-respected researchers, you just mentioned him, the guy that passed away that was doing the implant cases, and then there's the guy that who's the psychologist or psychiatrist, Ben?
John
Mac, that got hit by the car in the UK. The drunk driver. Yeah, I just find it kind of odd that these people that are doing groundbreaking research, they're really getting to the bottom of things, with their research, and suddenly they just pass away or they have an unfortunate accident, and it seems to be a little bit fishy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I could add actually to that where Preston mentioned the interest from government, and I did sit through the NASA press conference. It was absolutely as boring as anything. They just literally reinvented the wheel and they just repeat stuff they said before. But people who do have these encounters sometimes report they do get visits from guys or gals, not like the Men in Black, the spooky kind. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who just want to, especially if they've had media attention, who want to know a bit more about their experience. And they sometimes introduce themselves as reporters, but it turns out later on they are actually connected to some kind of intelligence agency. And they ask them lots of probing questions and things like that about what were they like, what was their craft like, what did they say, things like that. Which shows that there is a kind of in the secret world, the state actors are very aware of what's going on, and they appear to take an interest in it. Although of course, there's official ridicule and denial on top of that, of course, which is a quote from a document written by the first head of the CIA. So yeah, it's pretty obviously there's probably a lot of classified material about contactees and abductees, which should come to light, I think.
Do you think that's likely to come forward in any Senate hearing eventually? I mean, maybe the first thing out the blocks that they're going to officially do is talk about cases where they've been seen from ships or aircraft. And I mean, David Grush was the one that was given the most telling information. But it's interesting that they put forward a guy that has to admit that he's never actually seen anything for himself in person. He can only relate it second or third hand of what he believes to be the case. And I think that's almost a very telling thing in itself, because the people that really matter, those ones that work behind closed doors, researching these UFOs, crash sources, whatever you want to call them, as soon as they step forward into the light, their lives would never be the same again. And that would really open up a whole can of worms if they stepped into the public light. The one that did was Bob Lazar, and he did it unofficially. But whether he's to be believed or not, but he's certainly one that brought it out into mainstream media, at least. That was like 30 plus years ago now, and everyone kind of like forgot, and now it's kind of resurrected those thoughts about him. Was Bob Lazar right? Because now David Grush is kind of like verifying pretty much what Bob Lazar was claiming. Where do you think we could be going next with these Senate hearings? I mean, we got some more whistleblowers coming forward, Preston?
Yeah. Well, there's these latest three, Grush, Fravor, and Graves, are the last of a long, long line of whistleblowers, and there's many behind the scenes just waiting, who I think are afraid of reprisals or damaging their reputation or what have you. I don't expect we'll be seeing any interviews with contactees or direct witnesses. Just speculating. I think what's probably going to come down the line is we're going to see some more blurry photos, some more blurry videos, and we know they have much better than what they're showing us. Because if you just look through the literature, there's, of course, the UFO landing at Edwards Air Force Base, which astronaut Gordon Cooper saw the film of. Show us that film. I don't think we'll see it. Show us the gun camera footage. Lou Elizondo said that he's seen footage that's far clearer than what's been made public. So at some point, I think we'll probably see some of that. They may even show us a little bit of metal and say, we don't know what this metal is, but are they going to show us the craft? I don't think that's coming anytime soon. I can't rule it out. I think the fact is truth, and you can't hide it forever. The analogy I would use is like a dam that is breaking, that is just filled with this enormous amount of information, that there's so much pressure on it, it's leaking all over. It's spilling over the top. To deny it would make you look not credible. And I think that's one of the driving forces behind the disclosure we're seeing, is to maintain control of the narrative. Because if you don't start saying something, people are not going to look to you for answers. They won't believe you. And we're at that point. The government is not considered credible on this subject by any UFO researcher. So I think we'll be seeing more movement for sure. But I think it's going to be, like you said, drip, 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 drip. I'm hoping that just collapses and spills all over everybody. And all right, here's truth. Face it.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned about the quality of footage, because, when you see this footage through gun cameras and it's like really grainy, very blurry, you can't make out any detail whatsoever. And yet here we are at home, all with our 4K TVs, watching 4K movies and things like that, and thinking, well, okay, here I am watching Netflix in 4K, very high quality detail there on that footage. The governments of the world are surely not just using webcams to view these flying saucers. They've got some pretty high-tech good stuff out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to look at the satellites, which can read a postage stamp or a newspaper that you're holding. You're telling me they don't have great photographs of UFOs, and yet we have. I mean, if you've ever seen a map of the number of satellites surrounding our planet, it looks like, flies on a piece of meat. It's black. They absolutely have the evidence, and they're not showing us. They have much better footage. There's zero doubt about that.
This is what I like about the Galileo project. This is because, of course, astronomy also has the ability to pick up a lot of data from the sky. And Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer, is actually running this thing called the Galileo Project, where he's trying to gather this evidence independently. There's also UAPX, an organization that's trying to gather independence on the ground independently using various cameras, including some that they've invented themselves, to get data on surface sightings for UAP or UFOs. I still like that term. In the areas, for example, where the Nimitz exercise took place, where the Tic Tac was seen. So they've actually achieved some results, and it's quite something. So I mean, we the people are not helpless. We may not have quite the same kind of equipment the secret government has, but we still have a lot of technology, and we should make the most of that. Try and use that.
I consulted with UAPX actually because I've done a lot of research into USOs, the Santa Catalina San Pedro channel, where there's an enormous amount of activity, and that's where they set up a bunch of their stuff. So yeah, I think we're at the verge now where, I think there is enough evidence in the public arena, honestly, to convince any hard-nosed skeptic if they're willing to look at it objectively. And some great footage. I would point to the Kumburgaz Turkey footage from 2007, 8, and 9, which no one has been able to debunk. Even the Turkish government declared it genuine. It's amazing footage.
This is the security guard, isn't it? On a beach, looking across the sea.
You can actually see two aliens in the
yeah.
Yes, you actually see two little heads poking out. Yeah, that's remarkable.
I did see a still of that of the aliens, and I don't know whether in the still they souped it up a bit in Photoshop to make them more alien looking or something. I wouldn't have thought you could get that clarification or clarity on the camera from that distance. I would have thought, yes, you could probably see figures going through the windows or whatever they are, but maybe they'd be blurry or ill-defined. But it's almost like as if they've run the photograph or the still frame of it through some sort of Remini type of program on a cell phone to clear it up, and it's coming out looking very alien. They've got an alien set button or something on their phone, but still remarkable footage anyway. Which is one thing, like the skeptics, it makes me laugh because we both know a few skeptics, don't we, Ben? Now, one particular gentleman, I won't mention his name, who I've known since I was a kid, really. He will quote the idea of, well, how can they get from there to here? Then he'll talk about Dr. Brian Cox saying, they're so far away, even traveling at the speed of light, it could take so many hundreds of years to reach us and things like that. Do we get any clues of where these beings, these greys, are coming from? I mean, we talked about the Betty and Barney Hill case earlier. What was that planet?
Zeta Reticuli, yeah. There's the star map that one of them showed Betty, yeah.
Yeah. Do we know where they're coming from, Preston? Does any of the witnesses kind of get any clues from these beings that kidnapped them?
Oh, sure. And I'm not sure I would use that term, kidnap, because some of the witnesses find that offensive. I will say that I did interview a lady by the name of Dolly Safran, who I ended up writing a full-length book about symmetry, because her case is probably the most extensive of anyone I've interviewed. And she was told flat out and taken there that the ETs come from the Orion system, the third star on the right. There's a little bit below it. They come from Orion. And I've heard that from other contactees as well. So when I hear that from independent witnesses, I think that lends a level of credibility to it. Sometimes people don't get that kind of answer or that kind of clarity, but certainly Orion is one place that is mentioned repeatedly. So I find that more and more compelling each time I get new information on that.
And it's interesting, actually, with Orion, because that comes up in the Graham Hancock book, Ben, and does you recall Fingerprints of the Gods?
That's right, yes.
With the belt of Orion through the what was that chamber in the pyramid?
Yeah, he claims that the architecture of the Great Pyramids of Giza is to match the belt of Orion, and he says that there's these little shafts in the pyramid which point towards where these constellations are. Now, I must say, when aliens themselves, I mean, aliens do mention constellations occasionally, but I do sometimes find it a bit dubious, and not necessarily that these experiences are false, but that the aliens are actually playing a little trick, because, for example, there's some that are described themselves as Pleiadians and Andromedans and things like this. Now, a constellation is a pattern of stars which we see on the celestial sphere, which is generated by the Earth's unique location within the universe. And if you move the Earth to a different part of the universe, you'd still see stars. If actually looked up, you might even see some of the same stars, but they would form a completely different pattern in the sky. We'd have to invent new constellations. So I do find a bit, when aliens focus too much on constellations, I do wonder why they're doing that, or whether it could be that someone is fantasizing, or it could be that they're deceiving us, or it could be that the extraterrestrials themselves are deceiving us. I often find that.
They would have to know, I guess, if these extraterrestrials are come from the star just in Orion or something like that. They'd have to know our kind of system of thought on astronomy and how we...
Makes sense that they do.
Stars. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
They when they contact people, say they're Spanish, they'll speak Spanish to a person, whether it's telepathically or otherwise, or Danish or what have you. They do seem to know pretty much everything about us. So that doesn't really bother me that they would label something using our terms.
It's interesting, though. Having said that, I mean, I do recall in the Betty and Barney Hill case is that under hypnosis, Betty came... Betty mentioned that the ETs or whoever they were, Greys or someone, came into where she was being examined, and they were trying to pull her teeth out, because apparently it came to light that Barney had false teeth, and whilst he was being examined, they managed to remove his teeth inadvertently or intentionally, and so they came to check on Betty's teeth at the same time that Barney was being examined to see if her teeth were coming out, and there was slight confusion on the part of the aliens about why her teeth weren't coming out. So I think it's a learning curve with these aliens. It sounds like a learning curve. Certainly they do seem to know a lot about us, but I think there's always the odd curved ball that does confuse them. I mean, I've heard of cases where you get these very humanoid-looking aliens that seem to interact with people, but they don't know how to use a pencil or something like that. Have you heard of things like that?
That does come up. Yeah, absolutely. This is still relatively new phenomena in terms of us understanding it, but let's face it, while this does go back hundreds, well, thousands of years, what's going on now is largely unprecedented, really beginning with the modern age of UFOs, 1947, 1948. Because before then, while there are accounts of people perhaps being taken on board, not in the numbers we're seeing today. It really ramped up huge in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. Because before then, we just don't have any large numbers of historical accounts. What we do have is shrouded through, of course, the belief system of each culture, which really didn't include extraterrestrials for centuries. These things were labeled as perhaps spiritual events or religious or astronomical events, but never was the idea of extraterrestrials really cemented into culture until, the modern age of UFOs. And we started getting so many cases, not just one or two, I mean hundreds upon hundreds, really beginning in the 1950s.
And the Greys have always come across to me, anyway, at least as being the bad guys. But now I'm hearing more reports, they seem to be very much more caring. Whereas earlier reports I used to read, it was almost like as if they were emotionless kind of beings. I mean, are we encountering different sorts of Greys, maybe from different places?
I think that there probably is some variation going on there. Having interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of people, I think we're getting a much clearer sort of picture of what's going on here. They are all humanoids, all the different types of ETs, whether it's praying mantis or basically human looking or tall whites or little blue beings or grays of all kinds, but short little grays, apparently, the 3-foot tall ones. And what I can gather are probably what we would call artificial intelligence, biological androids, who aren't particularly emotional and who do the work and are often the ones who scoop people up out of their bedrooms and carry them to the craft, where they do meet grays which are much more emotional and perhaps caring. And I do think there's been an overlay of fear over how this whole phenomenon has been portrayed. Certainly the media is very fear-based and loves a lurid, scary story. And people who are having trauma are perhaps more likely to seek help and publicize their experience, where someone who's had a wonderful experience doesn't need help. So it's being underreported. I think now we're realizing the onboard experience is not nefarious. People are being taken on board and physically examined and healed. And I have 300 plus cases of that documented. And I wrote a book on this too, actually, a new edition, because this is not getting the attention it deserves. I think this is one of the main motivations behind the onboard experience, is all about healing. I've got cases for pretty much every major researcher, whether it's Bud Hopkins or John Mack or David Jacobs or Philip Mantle or Timothy Good or Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, Tim Beckley, Edith Fiore. I can go on, mind you. This is a big part of it. And if you look at the sequence of events that takes place on board a craft, while it can be and often is scary for people, especially in the beginning, I think at some point they come around and realize, no, they're not trying to hurt me. They're not trying to scare me. I really have zero accounts of what I would call sadistic behavior, where ETs are intentionally trying to hurt or scare people or take over our planet. I have no evidence of that. They will heal you, take you down to the engine room, actually explain exactly how these craft are powered, how they run. They'll take you up to the control room. I have many, many cases of this. They will sit you down in the seat and let you fly the craft. And I know that must sound crazy to skeptics, but Grant Cameron just put out a book called Sky Pilots, where he outlined some 60 cases. I'm like, yes, because I keep getting those. That was true with Dolly Saffron. They taught her how to fly the craft. They will give you all kinds of warnings. And this is pretty easily, I think, interpreted as being good for us, because they're warning us about how we're treating each other, our warlike ways, our use of nuclear material in any capacity, the destruction of the environment, pollution, chopping down of forests. They're very, very concerned about how we're treating ourselves, each other, and our planet. How is that nefarious? Also, one final thing is people come away from their experiences with credible psychic abilities. It's elevated to some degree, that they start experiencing healing or astral travel or remote viewing or mediumship or physical levitation. Honest to God, human levitation. I've got like 20 cases. I started just recently looking into that because Jacques Vallée had cases, Bud Hopkins. It happened to Whitley Strieber. Stephen Greer described levitating following his experience. So the point is, they are giving people this boost in their psychic abilities. And that is, again, one of their goals, one of the reasons for contact. And they will tell people this: you need to wake up. So this, I think, all speaks to why these guys are here, what their agenda is, and the fact that they're not here to take over the planet. Real quick, I had a contactee from the East Coast ask them that flat out. Are you here to take over the planet? This little gray, who had introduced himself to her as Sam, that's his name, said, no, we have zero interest in your planet. It's far too crowded. You guys are very emotional. You're very hard to be around. Your planet is very polluted. We have access to all the planets we need. We have no interest in your planet. We are interested in your genetics. But that was essentially what they told her.
Interesting. Food for thought then.
Yeah. So, may I ask, Preston, why do you think it is that the contact phenomena has increased so much, like you said, from the 1950s onwards?
I think that, and I'm certainly not the first person to say this.
Yeah.
I'm a relative latecomer to the field. I got involved in the late 1980s, well, mid-1980s. But many researchers have remarked on the coincidence or the synchronicity that the atomic age coincides exactly with the modern age of UFOs. And I think what we're dealing with is that's the time when we finally reach the ability to completely destroy ourselves and absolutely obliterate all life on this planet. And the ETs, who have been in the sidelines for millennia, apparently, finally said, you know what? We're going to have to step in. We can't take over. People have to solve their own problems. But this is when they started pulling people on board. And again, their number one message is about nuclear proliferation. That's the first thing they will warn people about. But along all those lines, I think we've reached a point now where if we don't change, we're looking at an existential crisis. And they're doing their part and intervening to the extent that they can to change our path.
As we're having this discussion, it's in the news. There's some people proposing that predicting there may be a confrontation soon between Israel and Iran, who are nuclear armed. Well, Iran is developing a nuclear deterrent right now, which of course could be a really, really horrible situation, not just for the people of those countries, but for the world at large. And this is generating, of course, making us, everyone, I'm sure in those countries, but everywhere else, people are feeling afraid right now. In your view, I mean, as someone who's spoken to lots of contactees, to what extent would the extraterrestrials intervene in order to alleviate this danger?
I don't think we can count on them to avert a nuclear war. I really don't. I'm not going to say that they won't, because there is some evidence that they have. We'll look at the Malmstrom incident in Montana of 1967, where they basically came down and shut down the nuclear weapons, the ICBM missiles. I think that's probably to the extent that they will intervene, saying, listen, you are on the wrong path. I don't know for sure. Obviously, that's very hard to determine, but they didn't stop Hiroshima or Nagasaki, did they? Mm-hmm. And if they had, I don't know if that would have been any better for us, because we wouldn't have learned our lesson. Mm-hmm. We need to learn to clean up our own messes. That's what they have told contactees. There was a couple in Arizona who I interviewed who were invited on board. They said it wasn't scary at all. And they were healed. And they said, why are you doing this? Why don't you just calm down and help everyone? And they said, we can't. It's up to you to solve your own problems. We are helping those who help others. He was a social worker. She was an herbal healer. They lived on Hawaii and were doing a lot of good work. So I think that's the extent that they're willing to intervene. But who knows? I think if we face an absolute existential crisis, there's a distinct possibility that they will scoop people off this planet, because a lot of contactees have gotten that message.
Yeah, I mean, there have been several, along with the three, like Trinity, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, there's been several thousand nuclear detonations in history in terms of tests, which have done terrible damage in places like Nevada, Australia, the South Pacific, and places like that, where people have actually died as a result of fallout from those tests. And there was reports of strange things being seen around them. For example, at Maralinga in Australia, where extraterrestrial beings, or something that could be what looks like extraterrestrial beings, were seen, and other places. So they seem to be monitoring the situation at the moment without actually taking steps with a few exceptions like Maelstrom, and there was that incident in Ukraine as well. Years ago, it was in the 80s, that was. But that was slightly different because they actually tried to... at first, it looked like they were going to launch one deliberately, and then they shut it down. It's very strange, that.
This shows that they can play with our toys a lot better than we can.
Yeah.
I think we're drawn to a break here on the Paranormal Peep Show. We're talking to Preston Dennett, and I'm co-hosting this episode with Ben Emlyn-Jones, who's normally our regular guest, but he's actually been a very good host this evening. So thanks for that, Ben, so far. So we'll take a break, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Today's the best day of my life! Woohoo! Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Join Andy and Neil every month on the Paranormal Peep Show, part of the Paranormal UK Radio Network, for fun, frolics and lots of information about weird stuff, UFOs, ghosts and things that go bump in the night and everything associated with them. Fascinating guests, fascinating talk, fascinating information.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Ben Emlyn-Jones, and I'm with Neil Ward here on the Paranormal Peep Show. And our guest this evening is Preston Dennett, and we're going to continue with our conversation with him this evening. So welcome back, Preston.
Thank you.
Preston, before we went to the break there, we were talking about the aliens, the ETs or the Greys, giving people messages of war and destruction, and kind of basically trying to implant these ideas on mankind that we're heading for doomsday scenarios. Now, I hear stories from other people, like we're being visited by, I don't know, humanoids. They might call them, you mentioned them earlier, Ben, I know that we don't like using the name Nordics, but it's the Nordics, the Pleiadians. Is that what they're called? I mean, some people refer to the Pleiadians.
Yeah, there are people who I know who channel the Pleiadians or have contact with what they call the Pleiadians. And they do appear to be very humanoid. They're described as being tall, fair-haired, usually bright blonde, with the very intense dark blue eyes. Usually the eyes are slightly larger than human eyes. And they appear to be very friendly, very benevolent, wanting to help us, teach us. They're very intelligent creatures. Very, very
Yes, they arrive with a shampoo and set, by the sounds of it.
But yeah, they seem to be very helpful.
Did you get any contacts with people, Preston, from reporting Pleiadian or Nordic kind of contacts? And do they share the same message that the Greys share, or do they give some sort of different kind of picture of a scenario for mankind?
The messages are always the same, whether it's Greys, short little ones, or tall ones, or mid-sized, or praying mantis, or human-looking, or what have you. The messages don't really vary. And yeah, I don't like the term Nordic either, because having interviewed a lot of people, it's not accurate. It's just not. I would call them human-looking. There was a gentleman I interviewed, Stan Hughes, from Idaho, who is a Native American, who had an encounter with a craft which landed in front of him on the road. Out stepped a human-looking figure, but according to Stan Hughes, he had dark skin, looked very much Middle Eastern, dark hair, dark eyes, darkish skin, but a very handsome man. He said, very strong, 6.5 feet, broad shoulders, wearing, I believe, let me see if I got this right, blue boots and a silver jumpsuit. Could be reversed. But at any rate, not fair skin and blue eyes, as we so often hear. And I interviewed another gentleman who had an encounter in Leo Carrillo Beach, which is along the coastline of Southern California, who saw humanoids as well. And they were human-looking, but each of them were about 5.5 feet tall, and he said looked Mesoamerican, Mexican, or Peruvian. And as is often described, there was multiple figures, men and women, wearing kind of blue jumpsuits, but looked very much alike, to the point that they could have been twins or brothers and sisters. That's very consistent. But the messages are, pretty much the same, regardless of the being that we're dealing with.
A thing that occurred to me the other day, thinking about it, if these beings are coming to Earth from wherever they're coming from, and this could be the Greys, the Pleiadians, or whoever, the Mantis people, they presumably must be landing on other planets as well, presumably taking their people on that other planet on board to do something with them, I guess. Did they ever mention any kind of other planets that they're dealing with in any of their contactee cases?
Yeah, it does turn up. In my book Symmetry with Dolly Safran, she describes exactly that, going to other planets where ETs did pick up other people and other, what we would call, Greys, certainly, but blue-skinned beings, human-looking people that look very much like Polynesians here on Earth. In fact, that's why the book was called Symmetry. According to her experiences, there's a symmetry to life throughout the universe, and that the plants and the animals, and certainly the people, all do have genetics and share a common heritage, but I do see a lot of variation, perhaps, the little details. It's essentially the same no matter where you go. And that does turn up in other contactee accounts, certainly in the literature, and occasionally I get accounts like that. It's not super often people will describe going to other planets, but it does certainly happen, yeah.
Do they say how they get here? I mean, obviously we got the Brian Cox says that you can't get from there to here because it takes too long a time. Do the ETs kind of explain how their warp drive, for want of a better word, works and how they overcome all those challenges?
Absolutely. And there's two main ways that they travel. There's interplanetary, and when they're flying around our planet, they're harnessing our gravitational field lines. And they explain this over and over to people, that they're using some people would describe it as anti-gravity, but it's usually somewhere along the lines of electromagnetism and gravitational field lines. But as far as interstellar distances, it's clear that they do have this ability because we're getting so many cases of this. And well, Dolly describes it in the book. I keep bringing her up because she's kind of become my go-to gal. She's got a lot of evidence. Support her case, by the way, corroborating witnesses, medical evidence, photographic evidence, and more. I just want to put that out there. Mm-hmm. But she describes how they open up what she calls a light gate. Using very high amounts of electricity, they're able to essentially leave our dimension and come back into the third dimension in any desired location. So not so much a wormhole or a portal, but is traveling interdimensionally. And that does turn up in other accounts of people who've had extensive contact.
Well, you mentioned you mentioned UAPX and their work, and in their documentary "Tear in the Sky," it's worth watching that, I'd say. And the title of the documentary is because they have seen objects appearing out of what looks like some kind of strange object. It's an object in the clouds which appears where these things just suddenly appear, as if it is the entrance of some kind of tunnel, and which sounds very much like what Preston has just described. Another thing Preston said I thought was interesting, the fact that you see life all over the universe and different planets having similarities to our own, and indeed we've been discussing how these creatures often resemble ourselves physiologically, which could have something to do with the panspermia theory, the idea that there is the building blocks of life actually travel across space between planets. If they do, then it's possible they take genetic information or morphogenetic fields which cause them to produce a parallel evolution type of process on different planets, which could explain why we meet beings from other worlds. They look somehow familiar to ourselves in some cases.
Yeah, which kept me out of the UFO field. It sounded too much like Star Trek to me. I'm like, really expected ETs to be something completely different. And we're just not seeing that. I think we really have to look at the evidence that we've got. And because there's a lot of shoe fitting and cherry picking in this field, people trying to push forth their theory or their agenda and picking the evidence that supports it. And that's not how science works. You have to take all of the evidence and see what you can come up with in terms of a consensus. And yeah, we're absolutely seeing mostly humanoids, bipedal beings, almost exclusively, I should say. I mean, there are cases of robotic beings, but even those are often described as humanoid in form, which I find super interesting. And there are cases of people who've been taken on board craft and seen what would amount to ET animals or strange vegetation, animal husbandry centers or arboretums. I know Artie Six Killer Clark, in her really excellent series of 3 or 4 books, has several cases like that. I know John Mack has a couple of cases as well. So, yeah, I think what we're seeing is basically symmetry throughout the life in the universe. But we're still trapped here on Earth. We don't know.
We are the backward neck of the woods by the things. Now, it's interesting because Brian Cox, sorry to go back to him, but he always has this thing, why are all these ET cases, they describe them, everyone's meeting people with a head, 2 arms and 2 legs, and he seems to be against that idea that the biological development on other planets should be completely different if they had a completely different evolution from us. But the other side of the coin is that we may be all coming from the same particular point or origin anyway. So therefore, we've kind of moved out to different planets and evolved separately as species, and we're cousins of these other creatures, if you like. Would that be fair to say?
I mean, you can speculate all you want, and that's why I don't think it's useful to listen to our government who lies, or to pundits on television, scientists who have not read a UFO book or done the research or even had an experience. And you can speculate all you want about what ET life might be like, or you could go to the evidence and look at it. How many accounts do we need? We don't have 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000. We have close to 1 million documented cases. So I don't know how many we need to first pass this barrier of skepticism. I don't quite understand the resistance to the idea of extraterrestrial visitation, because the evidence is certainly there, and I think what we're seeing is undeniable. These are craft. They are leaving burn traces on the ground. They do have windows. ETs are coming out. People are not in their rooms or wherever they're supposed to be when they're claiming to have been taken on board. People are seeing.
What the skeptics do is that they have an ideological commitment to what we talk about not being true. For whatever emotional reason, they have a need for it to live in a world where these things don't happen. And the Professor Brian Cox, whom Neil mentioned, is a notorious gatekeeper. He is a particle physicist who is put in the media to present science programs on anything other than his specialized field, which is all his specialized field is the only thing he knows anything about. He's completely ignorant on everything else. And he's also got a terrible ego problem and can be basically made to dance to any tune. So this is why I think he's ideal for the job. So I think people like that are part of the reason the cover-up continues. Some of them are just have this emotional desire to live in a world where these things aren't true. Others are useful idiots, and some are deliberately lying to keep the truth from the public.
I kind of get it. I was a skeptic. I understand it was a very difficult adjustment. I was not happy finding out this was real, because it completely collapsed my belief system, what I thought I knew, what I was taught. And it's a core belief. I mean, this is something that goes right to the heart of how we view ourselves in this universe. Even as far as, religion and politics, it's a very sensitive issue for some people, and they just don't want to go there. I understand that, but do you want to live in truth or do you want to live in denial? If skeptics, I've talked to some, they won't examine the evidence. They absolutely will look the other way and stick their head in the sand. How is that scientific? It's not. So you have a choice here. I think everyone has a choice to either look to our governments for answers, good luck with that, or look to yourselves, and look to the contactees. Do your own research. Don't believe what I'm saying. Interview some people, see what actually happens. Reach out for yourself. Have a sighting, and you will know. I know UFOs are real. I've seen them. It wasn't enough for me to, interview my brother who saw one, my sister-in-law, my other sister-in-law, several friends, and people I worked with for years. Like, this is crazy. I want to see one. These guys have. So, yeah, eventually I did. I know it's real. I think people need to do their own research and come to their own conclusions, and they'll see that there is truth to this phenomenon.
Do I recall correctly that the ETs of a certain fraction are aware of you as an author? Is that right?
That is right. Yeah, I've kind of gotten hints of that here and there. I remember I asked a lady to go on public access television, and she had an encounter shortly before she was due to go on. The ETs told her, no, we're aware that you want to do this. I thought, well, gosh, if they're aware of her, they must know about me. Another time I was interviewing a gentleman, and he called me up the next day and said his little son, who was like 5 years old, 4, came running in after he hung up the phone with me, said, Daddy, a star landed in front of the house. And after talking to his kid, realized it was a craft. So they were there while we were on the phone together. I did have a lady who told me she was referred to me by the ETs. And I took that with a grain of salt until Dolly said the same exact thing. She said that they gave her my name. And it was not long after that, I got a call from a guy in England. Well, I didn't know him. He didn't know me, but called me up because he had an encounter, and the ETs were talking about we're on the wrong path and we're heading for disaster, and there's going to be great earth changes, and they warned him about nuclear proliferation, all of the things we had been talking about. And I basically counseled him, which is mostly what I do, honestly. And after we talked for about an hour or two, he said, well, one more thing. I had my encounter with Grays. It was this morning, and they told me to call you. They gave me your name. And when he said that, I mean, that was enough for me to be like, okay, here we go again. Wow. I think they know about all of us. You, Neil, you, Ben, certainly. They know about all of us.
I wonder if they'd like to appear as our next guest.
I'd like to meet them,
yeah. So you've seen UFOs as well, Ben, haven't you? I'm the only one that hasn't seen it. I feel left out.
I've seen. Well, you never know, Deal. I mean, you'll get your chance. I've several dozen times I've seen things in the sky I can't explain. I mean, there's 3 instances I think really defy explanation. I would say, where I've seen objects where, if they were everyday objects, they were in a position where I would have been able to identify them, and I couldn't. But yeah, I mean, they're more common than people think. I mean, they if you go to sky watches, for example, Neil, I mean, you'll get some success. Without doubt, eventually you'll get some success, especially where flaps break out. People go there and they see them all the time. This is one of the reasons they have these cover-ups and weather balloon stories and things like that. It's because these things fill our skies. They can't be suppressed. You can't have a cover-up in things like astronomy. It's the one truly democratic science. All you can do is when people see these things and try and persuade them they're not seeing what's actually there and they're seeing something else. And with most people, unfortunately, it is very easy to persuade them, especially when they have jobs that depend on it. For example, if you're a scientist, you have rent to pay like everyone else. You don't want to risk your tenure. And as John Mack discovered, John Mack was persecuted in the world of his employment and his academic career because he simply said what he thought was real and provided evidence. So, so that's how secrets are kept. People will tacitly collaborate with any cover-up if there's enough pressure put on in that way.
Now, interestingly, going back to Mac, he was featured in the Netflix series Encounters, which yes. I know, Ben, you've watched one of the episodes or maybe 2 of them. I watched
the first one, yeah.
Honestly. and it covered the Welsh Triangle that we discussed before. But it also discussed, I think, in the second episode, the Zimbabwe case where John Mack went over and interviewed the kids. Now, it's interesting that these UFOs, in both cases, or flying saucers or craft, whatever you want to call them, are landing in the vicinity of schools. It's also happening in Australia as well.
Yes, still 1966.
So, yeah. So, do you think, Preston, there's it sounds like there's a purpose, an intentional thing there to land in front of a load of school kids as witnesses, an impressionable age, to pass on this doomsday message, to try and get a message across to them, because maybe they're not cutting the mustard with the adults or something. Well, I mean, what's your take on the ETs appearing to loads of kids at schools?
So glad you brought that up, because I ended up writing a book on schoolyard cases exclusively, because I heard about Rua, Zimbabwe, of course. That's world famous. And immediately thought of Westall High School in 1966. And I thought, well, wasn't there another in 1967? There was at Crestview Elementary School. Of course, Broadhaven in Wales, 1977, I think it was. I started looking deeper into that. There was, of course, the Hillsdale College incident in 1966, which was 2 weeks before the Westall High School case.
That was in Florida, wasn't it? Was that Florida?
The Opelika, Florida, Crestview Elementary, yeah. Which was 1 year to the day after Westall, to the exact day. Once I started, as I'm digging up these cases, there was this incredible timing aspect. It became clear to me that the ETs were doing a publicity campaign, much like an author or a musician, going from city to city or, school to school. And 100 cases, half at elementary school. Half of them, which is significant, almost all daylight encounters, very low level, long lasting. And in fact, in 1/3 of them, and this really blew my mind, it actually landed, or ETs came out, which is relatively rare given the huge number of sightings to have a landing, particularly during the day. So it became absolutely clear to me, certainly, that this is a publicity campaign on the part of the ETs to, in effect, announce their presence in a very clever and effective way, because children don't look through things in a way that is all through the lens of fear, perhaps, or interpreting it one way or another. A lot of them have never heard of UFOs at all. So it's really astonishing to hear their accounts and see their drawings of these craft and ETs. So many cases. And I'm going to have to put out a second edition, because it's just about doubled since I put that book out. It's absolutely something they're doing. And if I may, right along those lines, I followed it up with a book about, this is funny to me, drive-in theaters, because I had 2 or 3 cases of my own, and then got 3 in a row when I was writing UFOs over Colorado. I wonder if this is a thing. Of course it is. I found 100 cases, and they do the same darn thing, hovering over drive-in theaters, right over the screen, long-lasting, putting out a display, flashing their lights, darting around, releasing smaller craft to a very large audience of, 200 to 400 people on the average.
That's interesting, because there's actually a film called Explorers, which is a great film actually from the 80s, where that actually happens. But do you know why they would do this? I mean, Leah's drive-in cinemas are something I think are unique to the United States. We certainly don't have them in my country, where you actually, rather than going into a room and sitting in a chair, you just park your car in front of the cinema screen. Is there a reason why you think they go to places like that?
Certainly thought about it. I think it is a publicity stunt, that they're basically announcing their presence. But why? Why would they do that? UFO researchers have long been aware that UFOs do put on what they call a display, where they're intentionally wanting to be seen. And we see this with certain flat areas or waves of sightings. Sometimes they're very brazen. So why are they doing that? I can only speculate, but I suspect it's to, because our governments won't. They have shown themselves to our governments, and our governments refuse to be truthful or transparent or forthcoming and admit to the extraterrestrial presence in an open and honest way. And I think ultimately what we're looking at is a very distinct possibility of open official contact. So I think ultimately that's what we're looking for, or what we're heading towards, I should say. And to me, as far as disclosure, that would be the end game as well. Show us the bodies, show us the craft, because I think at some point, once we can fully accept the fact that we are being visited, we aren't alone, we will have open official contact. And I just cannot see this going any other direction. It's not going to go backwards. The cat's out of the bag. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Can't put it back in.
Ben, you wrote a book. You wrote a book about disclosure, didn't you, in your Roswell Rising novels?
Yes, I did. Roswell
Disclosure, yeah.
Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, and there are 2 sequels, so it's like the Roswell trilogy. But this is something I'm very, very interested in, and the purpose of writing these books, which are fictional, they're just it's an imaginary story, but it's about a kind of like it's one of these what if scenarios. What if we did get the truth instead of the lies, and what the world would be like? And so that led to a scenario which I adapted into a story. So yeah, I mean, I'm like yourself, Preston. I write books, although even though mine are fictional, they're allegorical. They're about real things that go on in the world today.
So how did you view disclosure through your book, Ben? I mean, would it be a perfect world or what?
No, definitely not. In fact, it's not a one-way street, and it's the path to disclosure is twisted with many backtracks in the story. And indeed, I think that is actually quite a realistic scenario. I believe the situation we're in now, in terms of our collective psychology, our cultural mindset, to undo that, to unlearn that and replace it with something else, I think is necessary. In the long run, I think it's a good thing, and it's actually essential if we're going to continue to exist as a species and continue to have a planet that's viable for life. Yet it's going to be, I think, a very difficult process for many people, especially those who've never really thought about it before. It's going to be a shock. It's going to make people reassess more than just the existence of life in the universe. It's going to make all of us assess our place in it and how we relate to ourselves on this planet. I think there's going to be some resistance. There's the forces of reaction will emerge, and there will be attempts, I think, to undo it once it started. I think we're already seeing that now. At any stage in this disclosure process, there are going to be people who want to try and roll it back. And they could even go to the extent of saying something like, oh, yes, all right, aliens exist, but they're really horrible and they want to kill us all. You've seen Independence Day? Yeah, it's like that. And so we need you to sort of like just trust us for a little bit longer and just do what we tell you so we can protect you from these evil aliens. I mean, Independence Day, the movie, Roland Emmerich's 1996 film, it's an appalling movie. It's really bad. But it's worth watching for an educational perspective, I think, because it seems to be an example of a very, very simplistic, monolithic expression of that sort of xenophobic dread.
Yeah, which makes zero sense, because how long have the ETs been around? Forever. Really, we have to take over?
I think they're already here, you see. They've been, people say, when they come in, they're already here. They're here now.
There was a case in North Carolina where a guy had face-to-face contact, and he said, why don't you just show yourselves? And they said, we have, over and over again.
So the normal argument from the skeptics, why don't they land on the White House lawn? I mean, presumably aliens must have been asked that. Has any alien come back and said, oh, well, we can't get the landing permission? Or what's the general kind of reply that you would give to those skeptics to say, come on, they've got to land on the White House lawn to meet all this viable?
I would say they did. They came awful close in 1952. They sure gave it a good college try. So they came up in the Exactly.
DC.
Yeah, 4 hours for actually 2 days in a row, and then did it again a couple of years later. And was our reaction? It was hostile. We chased after them. We were trying to shoot them down. I would point to the work of Frank Ficino Jr. His book, Shoot Them Down, shows how truly heinous our actions have been towards the ETs, who aren't shooting us down. They're not bombing people and killing millions. No, they're not doing that. We have a tendency to impose our own cultural mores and values onto other people. And really, it's us I'm worried about. It's our governments that I'm worried about hurting us, not the ETs. They tried to land on the White House lawn and were not welcomed in any way. That would be my...
It's very much like the opening scene in the Day of the Earth Stood Still, where Michael Rennie, as the alien, comes down the ramp and he goes to get out some device or something as a gift, and a soldier shoots him. It's his first reaction: shoot him, and it's just such a sort of automatic reaction. We got to shoot that what we don't understand. Does seem crazy. Although Grush, in his testimony, was asked something along those lines: have these aliens ever harmed any human? And he kind of indicated that yes, they've murdered people, and also witnesses have been murdered or something of that akin during his testimony. Does anyone recollect that being said?
Yeah.
I thought he was talking about government murdering witnesses, is how I kind of took it, because I do think that there's a danger of that, but I don't have any cases of ETs murdering people. I know there are cases of injuries, people who walked up too close to a UFO and perhaps gotten radiation sickness or something along those lines. Yeah, and people was like, oh, there's human mutilations. And they sent me, I looked into it. There's 10, 20 cases, which to me look like what I would call my labs. Honest to God, government doing.
Luckily, it's very rare.
ETs.
Luckily, it's very rare. It's similar to the cattle mutilation phenomenon and things like that, which is a big subject. I don't have time to go into detail, but it seems to be similar. And luckily, it's very uncommon.
Do you think that's trying to badmouth the ETs by having these cattle mutilations, and it's really humans behind all that?
100%, because that's what I'm not specializing in that area, but that's what Gabe Valdez said, and he was really the go-to guy for years. That's what Larry Fawcett said when he looked into it. This is what a number of researchers have said, that at some point our government is going to have to answer to it, because they're the ones behind it. That's what Dolly Saffron was told by the ETs. They said, it's not us, it's your government who is doing that. They are masquerading. They are absolutely, and I think we see evidence of this, and there's certainly a lot of buzz in the UFO community about a false flag, putting forth a false ET threat narrative.
That's actually a big concern of mine too, that it should I suppose if they do go for this Independence Day-like scenario, they'll need to do at least something similar to what was done in the film. But that is, there'll have to be some kind of attack, which will be probably from a craft, an anti-gravity craft from the secret space program, which will look like it's been done by an extraterrestrial, just to frighten people enough and to make them believe that these nasty aliens mean business. And there's been examples in history, of course, of that.
Yeah, I think we do have enough reverse engineered craft that look like UFOs where they could do some real damage, and certainly have already. Look at how the public views the UFO phenomena. Even now, with all these recent steps towards, in big, huge quotes, disclosure, people still have a hard time with this subject. If you come forth and say, I've been in contact with ETs, they'll give you the side eye. It's still a lot of ridicule and disbelief surrounding this subject, which is unfortunate because, like I said, so many people are having encounters. It's far, far more common, I think, than the general public realizes.
Getting back to the Mexico disclosure that they had with Jaime Maussan, and he presented these small alleged alien mummified bodies to the press and the public and the whoever was there. What was your initial thoughts when you first saw them? I mean, a lot of people ridiculed them, but I mean, now they've supposedly done tests on them now that sort of kind of confirms their skeletal inside, etc., and they're so many thousands of years old. What's your thoughts on that, Preston?
Well, I hate to be on the fence, but I am, because we've kind of gone through this sort of thing before. These mummies don't look like any ETs that people have described to me. And I think they said something about them having eggs inside of them. I'm like, wow, that's bizarre, to say the least. These are thousands of years old, allegedly. So I'm not sure how much relevance they're going to have to current events. Could be a game changer in terms of evidence. I'm waiting to see if the science rolls out on this and is verified by people who are more independent or don't have a vested interest in this, because I haven't seen that yet. There's been some pushback by one of the people cited by Lassan, who said that she was not involved in studying this. So we'll see how it develops. I think it'd be very interesting and, a real game changer if these do turn out to be something that's completely unknown in terms of, a humanoid. But it's really hard to say. There's no evidence that these guys were flying craft around or ETs even. There could be another form of humanoid that we've seen everything from, the little hobbit people that they discovered not too long ago to Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal and so forth. So I am very much on the fence about it. I'm skeptical by nature, because finding out UFOs were real in a weird way made me more skeptical of everything. So I want to see the proof. I want to see the science on it.
Right.
That's where I'm at.
I know that there's actually a British researcher, Steve Mara. He went to Peru in 2018 or 2017 and did was allowed to examine these bodies and gather some data on them. And unfortunately, his conclusion were that they are actually constructed from spare parts of humans and animals, particularly for the black market of antiquities. So basically, a lot of Peruvian mummies and Inca mummies and things like that are being sold for sometimes millions of pounds on the black market. It's actually really, really devastating because it's destroying the heritage, the historical legacy of this very, very ancient country that has this grand classical civilization. And so Steve believes those mummies are not what they appear to be, and he's presented the evidence in Phenomena magazine, which is a shame. I think if that's the case, then Jaime in a sense has possibly derailed the entire the momentum that's built up by this excellent hearing. I mean, there was some really interesting speakers beforehand, and the next day all anyone was saying in the newspapers was about the mummies, these little, or whatever they were, these strange little figurines that look like sculptures to me. Apparently the heads are made out of dog skulls or llama skulls and things like that. It's disappointing, very disappointing and upsetting.
Interestingly, I've seen photographs of them, and then you see another set of photographs, and they look completely different from the other mummies. Like the eyes are much bigger in some of these pictures, or the eye sockets, and it's like, that doesn't look like the other photo, and yet supposedly from the same set of mummies or something, I was never convinced when I saw those. I thought they just looked like they made a female or something, crafted in a kid's art class or something. They looked really ridiculous. There was no formal, there was a shape to them, but they didn't look like, they looked like sculptures of statues that one might do as an amateur kind of artist thousands of years ago when you're making a god statue or something, when you're drawing a god statue. They did not seem anatomically, I know we're talking about aliens here, but they just looked like too measured and stiff and squared up and everything like that, as if they'd been measured against a ruler, and it just looked wrong to me. I felt wrong, despite what they're claiming.
Governments, it's encouraging that the governments are looking into this. I think that's the best thing that's coming out of all these congressional hearings. like in the U.S. with that hearing with Grush, Graves, and Fravor. It was really interesting to hear the senators saying, we believe UFOs are real. We think there is a cover-up. The Pentagon is pushing back. They're not cooperating with us. Some of us have seen UFOs. When he said that, I'm like, wow, okay. He says, I'm not going to name names. I wish you would, because if you want to be other people to be forthcoming and truthful, you may as well, lay it out. Who's seen UFOs? What did you see? But it was real strong rhetoric. And I think that was different. That's unprecedented. We haven't had that before. Mm. And it's really interesting to see, because I think the best thing that's coming out of all of this is that this subject is getting some legitimacy. A lot of people who would never have looked at this before are now looking at it. And there's enough evidence, like I said, there's 80 years of people studying this, that there's enough knowledge there for us to get a real good handle on what's going on. So we'll see.
And of course, you're being interviewed for things like the History Channel now, turning up on various shows like that, which is great stuff from your perspective. But I think that's even greater stuff from our perspective of seeing someone like yourself who talks about humanoid encounters and that appearing on mainstream TV, where you'll presumably in the future get an opportunity to talk more about those particular interesting cases rather than just lights in the sky. You can go into great detail about some of the strange, bizarre encounters that people have had that you've interviewed. Can you give us maybe a really good case from your latest book about the humanoid bizarre encounters and why you consider it a really, truly bizarre humanoid encounter?
Okay. Well, what's really interesting is, I did put the subtitle High Strangeness because I think that gets edited out of a lot of cases, which is such a shame because there are people experiencing this and they have no recourse. One case that comes to mind involves two brothers. I like it. It's a multiple witness case who had repeated visitations by little blue beings, which I don't hear a lot about. The Greys get a lot of attention, human lookings, and even praying mantis. But occasionally I hear about these little blue beings. And in fact, this gentleman, Ron Johnson, is his real name, from East Palo, Texas, and his brother were visited repeatedly by these little blue beings. And he reached out to me because my sister-in-law, who is an artist and worked very closely with me and experiencers to accurately portray what people are seeing, drew an illustration of these little blue beings. And when Ron Johnson saw it, he, on my YouTube channel, he contacted me because he says, this is exactly what I saw. And they're very short, 3 feet tall, wearing these kind of robes with a hood, flat faces, kind of thick, wrinkly bluish skin, little eyes, carrying a little wand. I said, that's exactly how I saw them. And in many cases, the events that he describes are fairly typical, but there's always high strangeness. I think what's really interesting in his case is that he and his brother would wake up in the morning wrapped up in their bed sheets like a burrito or a Tootsie Roll, very tightly with their arms bound behind to their sides, to the point where they couldn't escape and had to call for their parents. And their parents came in and said, how did you do this? They said, we didn't do this. This is the little blue man. They came last night. Their parents were very religious, did not believe them. But that happened many times. And I had to laugh because I've heard this from other people. I had another witness describe the same exact thing. Another lady said she woke up to her quilt rolled up into like a Tootsie Roll and tucked over her neck and tucked under the mattress. So she had a real hard time, pulling herself out of bed. And it's funny when one of the witnesses, I sent him a copy of the book, read that chapter, and he says, I'm so sorry I didn't tell you this, but that exact thing that these boys described happened to me. This is something they do, I think, intentionally. I'm speculating here, but I'm guessing it's sort of a calling card, a way of letting people know that they were visited on that night. I don't know. It's very bizarre, very high strangeness.
It's interesting they come as threes, these beings. I see a lot of accounts where these beings will have come in threes for some weird reason.
Yeah, that does turn up, I think. But we see that here on Earth when someone goes on a mission, or in the military, certainly. You've got your 3 people in case one gets hurt, one can stay with the hurt person, and the other can go get help. I think it's just an optimal sort of number for an operation. You don't want too many. That would attract notice, and it's harder to control. But I don't know. We do see that. I don't think there's any weird symbology to it, as some people put forth.
I was looking at a YouTube channel the other day about people's afterlife experiences where they temporarily die and go to the other side. And this guy said that he was approached. And as you were describing these 3 small beings, it almost sounded like that. There was 3 small beings that he was, they were laughing with him, not being like tormenting devils or something. They were very good humored. And eventually this kind of main being that was in charge of them sort of stepped in and started saying, well, what have you done with your life, etc., etc. It's now time to go back. But it's interesting, these small beings were there initially to sort of bring him through to the afterlife. It's just very bizarre. And I thought, well, that sounds almost like an abduction scenario rather than an out-of-body afterlife experience. It's just so strange. Right, I think we're going to have to draw this to a close now. So I think before we go, though, Preston, we'd like to find out more about your books and where can people get hold of you and find out about your website and everything.
Thanks, Neil. I appreciate that. My books are available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, other online retailers, at bookstores. I do have a website and a YouTube channel. I'm all over social media. If you just punch in my name, Preston Dennett, it should take you there. Always love hearing from people. You can contact me through my website if you have a story or a question or a comment. It's an important subject. I think it has the potential to change the world for the better. And yeah, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about this stuff because I think it's real. I really do.
Great. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time. So
Preston.
your new book is, you got a new book in the pipeline?
Oh, always. I've usually got 3 or 4 books in the pipeline. I'm just about finished with volume 5 of my Not From Here series, all about the sort of more bizarre and outlying types of cases, weird patterns in UFO research. Working on another book about my out-of-body experiences. I'm huge on that. Probably going to put out a sequel for Symmetry, because we really only skimmed the surface of Dolly Safran and her experiences. So, yeah, I've got a lot of stuff in the works. Not From Here, Volume 5 is probably going to be the next one out, hopefully later this year.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, wish you well with that. And thank you very much once again, Preston Dennett, for joining myself. And Ben, thank you to Ben Emlyn-Jones for co-hosting on this evening. Thank you, Ben. So, Ben, again, for people that are interested in your own writings, you have your own radio channel and also your own YouTube channel, don't you?
I do, like Preston. I'm all over social media. You can find me simply by putting in my name or Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, or just write HPANWO. It's pronounced Hapanwo, and that's basically my main website. You can find all my other things. Thanks very much to Preston. It's been a really interesting discussion. It really has.
Cool. Well, you'll have to grab Preston maybe for your own radio show sometime, Ben.
Oh, you're very welcome, Preston, to be on Hapanwo Radio. Yeah.
Cool. Well, you two should exchange details. I know that you know each other's emails, so yeah, maybe collaborate a bit further down the road.
Glad to, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much indeed to everybody, and thank you to yourselves listening at home or wherever you may be. And join us next month on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Good night.
You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, voted #1 for paranormal podcasts in the UK.